It's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog, and yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB. Issues that we need to look at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is broadcaster and author Tonya Buxton, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. There's growing pressure on the Prime Minister following yet another Westminster sex scandal. Now, a former civil servant has accused Boris Johnson of deception when responding to questions about the disgraced MP Chris Pincher. A new poll reveals the growing number of Brits worried about being able to afford everyday essentials. But nobody is talking about how fat cats are coining it more than ever before. Plus, the Labour leader's promise to make Brexit work. Can Sir Keir Starmer ever be trusted after voting against it so many times? And sex education in schools. What are pupils being taught? And should parents have the right to know? Those are the topics we're fracking for the next hour. What do you need to gas about? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. First though, it's time for the headlines.
Good afternoon. It's just 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Cabinet Office Minister Michael Ellis has defended the Prime Minister, saying Boris Johnson didn't immediately recall the conversation in late 2019 about Chris Pincher's behaviour. It's after a senior civil servant this morning accused Downing Street of not telling the truth over claims Mr Johnson wasn't aware of official complaints. Mr Pincher resigned last week over allegations he drunkenly groped 2 men, with further historic allegations emerging since. Number 10's been accused of shifting its account of what Mr Johnson knew. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner said Mr Johnson's defence had been completely blown apart.
Prime Minister was personally informed about these allegations, and yet he was either negligent or complicit. What message, Mr Speaker, does this send about the standards of this government?
The Cabinet Office Minister Michael Ellis responded by saying the mechanisms for upholding standards in Parliament do exist.
We do have a Parliament, Mr Speaker, as you know, that upholds standards to cover all of those in public life. No system can replace the fundamental importance of personal responsibility. We all know this to be true. Codes and rules and oversight bodies are there to guide us, but we all ultimately, in public life, must choose for ourselves how to act.
The Met Police says it's made changes to how its firearms division is run after a public inquiry found one of its officers lawfully killed an unarmed man. It said it would carefully study the inquiry's recommendations, having found there were numerous failures throughout the operation. 28-year-old Jermaine Baker was shot at close range while taking part in an attempted prison break 7 years ago in North London. The officer told the inquiry he thought Mr Baker was reaching for a weapon. Tennis player Nick Kyrgios has been summoned to a court in Australia to face a charge of common assault against his ex-girlfriend. Australian police said he would face a magistrates' court next month. The player has made the Wimbledon quarter-finals and is due to play tomorrow. Sweden and Finland have taken the next steps in becoming members of NATO this morning. 30 NATO allies have signed off on the Nordic countries joining the alliance. It's the most significant expansion of the military group since the mid-1990s. Before they're officially allowed, they must be approved by the individual parliaments of member countries. That can take up to a year. In the US, a man's been arrested following a mass shooting at a 4th of July celebration parade in Chicago. 6 people were shot dead after a gunman opened fire with a high-powered rifle from a rooftop. Around 30 people, including a child, were seriously injured. Police say a 22-year-old suspect named Robert E. Cremo has been detained. Elsewhere in the country, 2 police officers were killed in another Independence Day celebration in Philadelphia. The mayor, Jim Kenney, says he's concerned every day.
So everything we have in the city over the last 7 years, I worry about. I don't enjoy 4th of July. I don't enjoy the Democratic National Convention. I didn't enjoy the NFL draft. I'm waiting for something bad to happen all the time.
Applications to join the police force in Scotland have dropped by more than half in the last year. There were just over 2,200 applications, down from 5,600 the previous year. Staff are currently in a pay dispute with Police Scotland. Since Friday, officers have not been starting shifts early or taking radio equipment home when their duty ends as part of the protest. 6 people have been charged over invading the circuit at the Formula 1 British Grand Prix over the weekend. Northamptonshire Police says the group, aged between 21 and 46, have all been charged with conspiracy to cause public nuisance. They sat down on the track at Silverstone on Sunday after the race had to be stopped and one of the drivers had crashed. All 6 will appear at Northampton Magistrates Court today. The NHS is going to trial using drones to send chemotherapy drugs, aiming to speed up deliveries of vital medicines with a short shelf life. An initial trial will see drugs carried from Portsmouth to the Isle of Wight, cutting journey times from 4 hours to 30 minutes. It's hoped the programme will pave the way for same-day delivery of medical supplies from anywhere in the country. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex for today's We Need to Talk About.
Pincher by name, pincher by nature, allegedly. The sort of behaviour it's claimed the Deputy Chief Whip carried out was acceptable in the 70s and 80s. It isn't now. But is this hyperreaction taking things too far? If Christopher Pincher molested other men, it's completely out of order, and I rather imagine if he had a history of grabbing women, the outrage would be off the charts. I also think there's a lot more to this than the public are being told. But appointing a reported sex pest as Deputy Chief Whip in charge of party discipline and pastoral care, and allegedly lying about it all, would demonstrate an absolute absence of a moral compass and plays into everything we already know about the Boris operation, where integrity and accountability are both tedious and optional. But it's now day 5 of Pinchergate, and the obsessive deconstruction of who said what to who and when is starting to feel like overkill. You see, the other problem is that I can tell you categorically there have been far darker deeds inside the Palace of Westminster, and for those who have been on the sharp end, doing something about it probably looks very daunting indeed when the media propels every single scandal to a DEFCON 1 magnitude. I'm never going to condone gropers and sex pests, but cynically using ugly behaviour in a game of political chess is ugly behaviour in itself. Well, in April, former Conservative MP Neil Parish made headlines when he was forced to resign as an MP after being caught watching pornography in the House of Commons. He's been talking to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who asked him if he thought the Deputy Chief Whip, should have been removed from Chris Pincher earlier.
Do you think, though, the Prime Minister should have removed the whip from Chris Pincher earlier?
Immediately. That's the bit that I have, because you see, the whip was removed from me before, I believe. I don't think there ever were any formal complaints made against me. What the Chief Whip had is the world's media, like I did, barking at him, and so he got frightened and he took the whip straight away from me, and then afterwards gave me no help whatsoever. And you see, this duty of care is what I really do feel strongly about this, because I want them to learn from what they did to me and not to do it to others. Because, you see, I had a good political career for over, 20 odd years, but I'd always been able, like European Parliament, I'd always been able to keep my farm and my family separate. And all of a sudden, they are in your space. They're shouting abuse at you outside the door. And so I couldn't cope with it, really. But I had no help. So you see, the party does need to not only use you when you're useful, but they can't. I wasn't a criminal. I was stupid. But you see, the chief whip treated me as though I'd committed murder. And then part of the regime that took the whip away from me was Christopher Pincher. Well, I mean, I'm not going to comment on his behaviour, but I just ask people listening to this to make a judgment who was worse.
Well, you can watch the full interview today in the briefing with Darren McCaffrey at 3 o'clock, straight after me. And fascinating it is indeed too, so stay tuned for that. Well, a short while ago, speaking in the House of Commons, Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner said the latest allegations about ministerial misconduct are all about abuse of power.
Since the resignation of yet another of the Prime Minister's ethics advisers last month, there has been an even bigger ethical vacuum in Downing Street, with no accountability in place. How can the Minister come here today and say that this simply just wouldn't happen again? The Prime Minister was personally informed about these allegations, and yet he was either negligent or complicit. What message, Mr. Speaker, does this send about the standards of this government and what they set? What message does this send to the British people facing a cost of living crisis while their government is paralysed with scandal?
Well, what message does it send? Let's talk now to Frank Furedi, author and Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Kent. Frank, fantastic to have you on the programme. What has been your reaction to the whole Pinchergate scandal?
Well, there's two issues. One is what Pincher did. And to be really honest, I think it's been blown out of proportion. He behaved like a childish oaf. His behavior is quite despicable. But it's a kind of behavior that it does not constitute the kind of crime that is being made out to be. I think there's been a tendency to turn what is an act of stupidity, individual stupidity, into a form of grave sexual assault. And I think that really is an inflation of the problem. What I'm really worried about is not so much what he did, but the subsequent reaction to that. The way in which all of a sudden Pincher became everything. Somehow public life in Britain comes to a standstill. We don't really care about all the big issues of our time, about inflation, about the fact that we're getting poorer and poorer. Suddenly everybody's eyes turns to the behavior of parliamentarians. That's problem number one, because it seems to me that the personal behavior of individual parliamentarians is far less important than what they do as individuals in public life, what they achieve or what they fail to achieve. Then we have a third problem, and that's the reaction of the government. And I think by this time, we've all learned that Downing Street has become incredibly incompetent. It doesn't really know how to react and to respond to the different charges. It actually becomes complicit in turning relatively small problems into a major scandal. If they had dealt with it honestly and forthrightly from the beginning, Pinchergate would have gone away by now. But instead, what you've got is this repetition all the time where you deny everything, and eventually you kind of are forced to admit and acknowledge your understanding of this. And you do wonder about the capacity of this government to make judgments about people. I mean, whatever you think about Pincher, well, why would you make him? Why would you appoint him as a whip, given what you know about him previously? So there are three different problems, but to me, what Pincher actually did is the least of our problems. That's something that, to me, is neither here or there. It's the reaction to it, and then the kind of false outrage that greeted it, and then subsequently the dishonest way in which the government handled these charges.
Well, let's focus on the reaction and the outrage about this. Who is to blame for that? Is it the media hyping things up in order to create clickbait and try and create news stories and run on lines? Is it members of the opposition who are using this as a way in which to try and skewer the Prime Minister, to topple him from power? Where would you say the blame lies when it comes to blowing it out of all proportion?
I think what's happened recently is that you have the convergence of the political class and the media class, and they almost feed off each other. So you have the mainstream media who's continually looking for scandals, who are examining every single indiscretion that they can possibly find, and they are in the business of casting that in the worst possible light. And I know that the day after the Pincher Gate issue came into the public domain, I was listening to the Today program, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because suddenly Harriet Harman comes on and she says, this is a major issue of sexual assault. This is a grave crime that's being committed. You think that this individual had committed some heinous crime, like raping somebody or killing somebody. And by the time the whole thing was over, you got the impression that something terrible had occurred, instead of putting things into perspective. So in that sense, you had the convergence of the media and the opposition doing this. I think what is interesting is that most ordinary people have really switched off when they hear stuff like this. You know, when you talk to people on the streets, their concern is very, very different. There seems to be kind of a parallel universe where there's a reality that exists on the streets and the media-fed reality, which is obsessed with the private lives of individuals, much more interested in their private lives than what they do in public.
Frank, always great having you on the programme. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this, and interesting views they are too. Well, let's speak now to Labour MP for Blackley and Broughton in Greater Manchester, Graham Stringer. Graham, Frank Furedi saying, you know, perhaps this has been blown out of all proportion. I'd imagine that you would agree with many people in your party that the big issue here is the lack of integrity when it comes to yet another Downing Street denial.
I think there are two issues. One is we don't actually know what's happened. Chris Pincher has admitted to being drunk and doing stupid things, but we have not had a investigation into how serious the events were. There's been one complaint.
Yeah, we missed a bit of what you said there, Graham. You temporarily became a Dalek, and that's a few tech issues. But do you think now...
The second thing is that it is quite...
I think, look, I'm sorry, Graham, we really wanted to hear your thoughts, but we're just not marrying up at the moment in terms of our connection. Well, joining me in the studio today is broadcaster and author Tonya Buxton. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, what Frank Furedi is saying about, you know, this guy, as far as we know, allegedly went around groping people. When you hear a more detailed report of it, it's... well, it's kind of worrying, isn't it? He was touching their nether regions. But is it at the stage now where we're blowing these things out of all proportion?
I think yes, the press is blowing a lot of it out of proportion. But I'm this naive kind of working mum who would have liked the people that are running the country, the people that we vote in, the people that we expect to put our rules and regulations to be above this type of behaviour. Somewhere along the line, we need to just start again. And someone who does things like that, and he has a history of it, shouldn't be put in a position of power.
And, I mean, what about the Downing Street reaction, saying that we didn't know anything about any allegations that have been made against him when we appointed him as Deputy Chief Whip? I mean, do you buy it?
No. I mean, isn't that the problem, that we don't believe a word that we're told anymore, because we know that they lie? I mean, didn't Boris call him Pincher by name, Pincher by nature? So where did that come out of? It didn't come out of the blue. He knew that he had this history of groping, getting drunk and misbehaving, and then he put him in a very senior position. I mean, it's just so wrong.
Funny, isn't it, that there have been reports that Carrie Johnson herself, when she was working at the Conservative Party headquarters, had suggested he wouldn't be right for the appointment, given some of the allegations made about him. But the press aren't really picking up on that. It doesn't suit their narrative.
No, it doesn't suit their narrative at all. And that's the point, is that it's all attack, isn't it? This game of politicking no longer really cares about what people have done. It's just about one side bringing the other side down, and the media just blowing everything up, constantly blowing things up, instead of taking an intelligent, moderate way of looking at things. And the situation is here that we have people that are in charge that should have a little bit more moral high ground. I'm no prude in any way, but I just expect the people that are going to get the power to how we live our lives, and they do have the power to do that, they should have a greater moral standing.
Tonya, thank you so much. Well, what are your thoughts on this? Blown out of proportion, or is it keeping you awake at night, Chris Pincher's alleged misbehaviours and the government reaction to it? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, the true extent of the cost of living crisis laid bare in a new poll, which found 2/3 of Brits are worried about being able to afford everyday items. Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine day for many of us with some sunshine out there, but also a lot of cloud. And later, cloud will thicken in the northwest as areas of rain move in from the northwest. Weather fronts toppling in around a large area of high pressure that is sitting to the west of the UK. Now that is extending a ridge into much of the country, so hence the fine weather for the rest of the day. But the weather fronts that are toppling in from the northwest, well, they're going to bring some persistent wet weather to northern and western Scotland and some dribs and drabs of rain to southern and eastern Scotland, then northern England after midnight, as well as North Wales and perhaps Northern Ireland. A lot of cloud extending south as well. And with the cloud and with a freshening breeze, it's going to be a mild night. Certainly temperatures a bit higher compared to the last couple of nights, but a bright start for southern and southeastern counties where the cloud doesn't quite reach from the northwest. A cloudy start elsewhere, and we've got that continued wet weather for western Scotland, particularly over the hills of the west. The rain tends to ease through the day, and eastern Scotland sees some brighter interludes at 20 Celsius in Aberdeen, but a gusty wind for northern areas will make it feel cool in many spots. And in the south, well, a warmer day to come, 24 to 27 Celsius in places. So plenty of sunshine and clear skies as we end the day on Wednesday, but a lot of cloud elsewhere and further light outbreaks of rain across northern areas. But even in the north, that rain is tending to fragment and disappear by dawn on Thursday. A mild night to come, so a mild start on Thursday, but a generally cloudy start, a lot of grey skies out there. And it may take some time across central and southern parts of the UK for that cloud to lift and break up. But it is looking brighter as we end the week. For most, it's looking warmer as well, with highs into the high 20s.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well.
I feel like I could take on the world.
Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News. Now, we know that many UK households are feeling the squeeze with inflation at a record high. But a new poll has found that as many as 2/3 of Brits are increasingly worried about being able to afford everyday essentials. Yet part of the UK's inflationary spiral is also down to a surge in demand, while supermarket Sainsbury's has reported its Taste the Difference range is actually doing better. Meanwhile, the Resolution Foundation think tank has found wages have barely gone up in 15 years, with the average incomes of the poorest fifth of the population not increasing at all, despite GDP increasing by 12%. It's clear to me what's going on is a widening wealth gap, with an increasingly embedded culture where big bosses get big bonuses, celebs and footballers are on repulsively huge sums of money, while working Joe bears the brunt of it all. If this government really want to level up, they need to look at the wage gap ratio. In the 1970s, execs were on 10 times more than those on the shop floor. Well, today, expect that multiple to average 60. It's downright immoral. Well, let's talk now to Josh Barabindi, Liberal Democrat councillor in Eastbourne, which became the first local authority in the UK to declare a cost of living emergency. The town has the busiest food bank in the UK. Josh, how bad are the people of Eastbourne finding the cost of living crisis?
Well, it's been tough for very many across our town. Local families and pensioners are feeling the pinch, with bills increasing, the cost of food increasing, and more. That's why we were the first town in the UK to declare a cost of living emergency. And we did it to force the government to wake up, to stop sitting idly by while people were finding it tougher and tougher, and actually pull their finger out and act. And what happened a matter of days after we did that is the government finally U-turned to introduce something resembling a windfall tax. And this is so important because of the very thing you've just raised, Alex. There are so many people, so many organisations in our society making a mint out of this crisis. Meanwhile, there are others who are struggling a lot. And what this windfall tax, we hope, will do is help to take cash from those oil and gas barons who don't need it and who've said they don't need it, and instead put it into the pockets of those who are struggling. It doesn't go far enough, though, Alex. Liberal Democrats have been calling for far more. We need a VAT cut for a year to put £600 back into the pockets of the average family to help them with their bills. And we need to see the pensions triple lock restored. Broken by this government, broken a manifesto pledge, and pushing many, many pensioners into further hardship, including in Eastbourne. I'm not having that, Alex.
Talk to me about the food banks, the sort of people going and the sort of people donating.
Well, fewer and fewer people are able to donate to food banks these days because they don't have the spare cash or the spare supplies to be able to give away. I went to visit Eastbourne Food Bank recently, working with them very, very closely. And donations are down and they need as much support as possible. That's why we in Eastbourne, as a borough council, launched a £250,000 emergency grant scheme to help organisations like the Food Bank with their supplies so that they can support people in even greater measure than they are already. We've given them £20,000 within days of the scheme being announced. And that is testament to the fact that as Liberal Democrats, we roll up our sleeves and actually get stuck in and do something about this, rather than pontificate, rather than get stuck into rows about who's lied and who hasn't, or who's made a promise about new hospitals and whatever else. We get stuck in and tackle the issues head on. And that's what a government should do.
Josh Barabindi, Liberal Democrat councillor for Eastbourne, thank you so much for coming on the programme. I feel like I've got to do a disclaimer and say there are other parties you can vote for. I mean, he was name-dropping the Lib Dems quite a lot there, but it sounds like he is a hard-working councillor. Tonya, food banks. Now, let's just lay this out there, because I think it's terrible if people have to rely on a food bank to feed themselves. But I must admit, the cynic in me wonders if every single person going through the door of a food bank really needs to be doing that.
We were talking earlier about basic rules of cooking. and kind of knowing how to cook and knowing how to be cost-effective, economical with things. You know, it's going to sound like I'm preaching, but I'm not. But the cost of living is terrible. People are really suffering. I'm getting that. And I'm getting it because it comes mainly from the fuel prices and things going up. But we can help ourselves a bit more. We can help a little bit more. And I'm worried that people are just turning to food banks without even really thinking about what they can do to help themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, what sort of sacrifices do you think that are acceptable for people to be making during a cost of living crisis? Would you be sort of suggesting to people before you go to the food bank, perhaps cancel the various subscriptions you might have for television, perhaps don't get a phone upgrade, perhaps think about skipping the family holiday this year? Or do you think that those things are good and right and make people's lives pleasant and enjoyable?
It's such a hard one, isn't it? Because what this government and all governments, and I'm apolitical, so I don't go with one or the other, is what they should be doing is finding ways for us to grow, and we want people to spend their money. But what's happening is that we're crunching them so tightly that they can't. I think everybody should be able to have a holiday, but, you know, most people growing up, did you have a holiday every time?
Not every
year.
Were you
growing up?
Did
Did you go on holiday every year? I think we've got this expectation of what it is to live now, and it depends on, you know, what you're doing, how you're earning. Yes, the big cats are living lives. We see it on television. We see the obscene wages that these people get, and that's what we want. But unfortunately, if that's not within your wage, then you have to find ways to work around it. It is hard, and I'm finding it very unfair because I do think there are simple things that could be done. And as you said, cut the VAT, in particular cut the fuel VAT, because if that happens, everything goes down again. And also, really watch the people who are putting the prices up, because they are putting prices up because, everything's going to cost more. Suddenly these prices are going up. These companies are making huge profits, and it's not because things are more expensive for them. I think that's what really needs to be watched.
Yeah, well done. Well said, Tonya. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer pledges to do Brexit better. But can we trust the man who voted 48 times to stop it happening in the first place? Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Cabinet Office Minister Michael Ellis has defended the Prime Minister, saying Boris Johnson didn't immediately recall the conversation in late 2019 about Chris Pincher's behaviour. It's after a senior civil servant this morning accused Downing Street of not telling the truth over claims Mr Johnson wasn't aware of official complaints. The Met Police says it's made changes to how its firearms division is run after a public inquiry found one of its officers lawfully killed an unarmed man. 28-year-old Jermaine Baker was shot at close range by an officer whilst taking part in an attempted prison break 7 years ago in North London. The officer told the inquiry he thought Mr Baker was reaching for a weapon. Tennis player Nick Kyrgios has been summoned to court in Australia to face a charge of common assault against his ex-girlfriend. Australian police said he would face a magistrate's court next month. The player has made the Wimbledon quarter-finals and is due to play tomorrow. Sweden and Finland have taken the next steps in becoming NATO members this morning. 30 NATO allies have signed off on the Nordic countries joining the alliance. It's the most significant expansion of NATO since the mid-1990s. Now each individual parliaments of the member countries gives approval. That can take up to a year. Excitement's building among tennis fans at Wimbledon ahead of Cameron Norrie's quarter-final match. As Britain's last singles player standing, hopes are high for the 26-year-old. He says it's even more reason for everyone to get behind him. He'll start playing Belgium's David Goffin on centre court shortly. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
So, Sir Keir Starmer has braved the Brexit brawl, saying it's all a screaming mess and only he can fix it. It's a bit rich coming from the man who basically helped make the dog's dinner deal we ended up with by leading the agitators in the Commons who gave Brussels the whip hand during negotiations. He voted 48 times to try to stop Brexit and shaped the Labour manifesto pledge to keep the UK in the single market and customs union. Well, now he expects us to believe he's had some sort of Damascene conversion, while also claiming he can sort the Northern Ireland protocol out by kowtowing to Brussels rules. The very red tape British people voted to bin during Brexit that makes it difficult for us to do our own trade deals and run our own farming. Doesn't matter how much Boris balls things up, Starmer, the self-harmer's hapless attempts to win voters back always ends with dismay. Well, here to tell us more is our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, what was Sir Keir Starmer's vision for Northern Ireland?
Nobody knows. He had 5 points and he said that he was going to sort out the protocol. The protocol, the legislation is currently going through the House to sort it out. It was, of course, his former leader, Tony Blair, that has even said that the protocol and the Good Friday Agreement cannot exist together. It's impossible. One changes the constitution of Northern Ireland through the back door, removing Article 6, the Acts of the Union, without consent. It also holds us inside Brussels with the ECJ looking over our shoulder. Both of these things Keir Starmer never mentioned. He said he was here 3 weeks ago. He was. I was in Dublin and he was here. But the optics of this are very bad for Keir Starmer. He went to Dublin first, then he came to Belfast, and then he releases this statement in the Irish embassy. He couldn't actually get this any worse than he really is. It's as if he's really trying to agitate the Unionists. And the Unionists, of course, are the people that are refusing to go back into government in Stormont, because they are saying that there is a constitutional change, that the consent that was built inside the Good Friday Agreement has gone. So I don't know what PR machine Keir Starmer was working with, but it obviously didn't work very well for him. And as the day has gone on in Northern Ireland here, more and more Unionists are very angry about what he has said and what he is doing, and the fact that he has done it there. There's also problems, of course, in and around the common travel area. It has been agreed for the next few years, but the problem being is that Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland aren't both in the same union. The common travel area was brilliant when we were both in the EU, or we both weren't in the EU, but that now means that European citizens that have the free movement within inside Europe can come in through Dublin, come across a borderless checkpoint into Northern Ireland, get on a ferry and arrive in Great Britain. Keir Starmer says he's going to contain that free movement of people, well, then that means that we're going to have British citizens in Northern Ireland showing British passports to get into, well, Britain. So he wants to make all these grand gestures and say all the right things to all the right people. But it's here in Northern Ireland that just those few weeks ago, Unionists in Northern Ireland were saying how great it was that the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, was defending Ireland, and they were looking Keir Starmer to be a British Prime Minister in waiting and to defend Britain. And that, you can argue, is exactly why Boris Johnson got the landslide that he did. It wasn't because of how he saw Brexit, it was because of people thought that he was standing up for Britain against the EU.
Yeah, Doogie Beattie, brilliant summary of it all there. Really enjoyed that. Straight to the point, Doogie Beattie in Northern Ireland. Well, let's talk now to Professor Patrick Minford, who is Professor of Applied Economics at Cardiff University and a bit of a Brexit economist at that. Patrick, it's fantastic to have you on the show. Now, before we get into Keir Starmer's various pledges and promises, which have been essentially eviscerated by our very own Doogie Beattie there, what sort of mark out of 10 would you give the government for how they're handling Brexit?
Well, the problem is that their policies have been pretty slow in getting off the mark. We've got 2 FTAs with Australia, New Zealand and Japan on top. That was actually a rollover and expansion of the EU's agreement, but there's plenty more to do, and they need to be done because until a lot of free trade agreements have been done with the rest of the world, which then mean that we're trading with the rest of the world at world prices, we are still effectively closely tied to the EU. And that means that when it comes to something like the Northern Ireland Protocol, the EU can still blackmail us by saying they'll put on tariffs because they can have an effect on us because we are still tied to the EU as a result of not getting all these free trade agreements done. So that's an important element. And the other elements are that we need to get on with liberalizing regulation. There's been a lot of talk about it and a good report from Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, the so-called Tigger report, but a lot more needs to be done. And finally, I think they need to get Brexit, the economy motoring, and get on with tax cuts and not put taxes up as they have promised to do, you know, with the corporation tax going up and all the income taxes going up and the national insurance contributions. I mean, that is very economy. That's a real thing. So they're not really
Patrick, I'm going to have to love you and leave you, I'm afraid. I really liked what you had to say, but you got a touch of the Daleks. That's happened a lot to me today. But thankfully, I'm joined by the wonderful Tonya Buxton. It's interesting. I keep hearing a load of MPs of all colours saying, oh, we need to cut VAT on fuel, oh, we need to lower things like corporation tax, without actually admitting the caveat of that is the only reason we could do those things is because we're now outside the EU.
Exactly. So why aren't we doing it? What's the reason that we're not doing it? And, you know, the whole thing, I mean, Keir Starmer coming in now and saying that he's going to get Brexit done is ridiculous because he had no respect for the British public when they voted to get out of the EU. He's been fighting to bring it back in. He has no respect for us and our democracy and what we want to do as people. I was on the fence. I didn't vote, Alex, don't tell anyone, but I didn't vote because I didn't know what to do. But what I do know now is that if there was a vote now, I would be voting out with kind of hands waving, because the way the EU treats Britain is with complete total disrespect, disregard, almost malice. We just want to be able to rule our country, to give the taxes that we want to give to our people and to move on. So Keir Starmer trying to jump onto that bandwagon now, it's just too late. No one's going to fall for it.
But why do you think it is that the government are not actually using some of these Brexit dividends? Why don't they seem to be pushing ahead with the tools we've now put in the government toolbox?
Well, this is the absurdity of it all, because can you imagine if Boris now did what he said he was going to do, cut the VAT, cut these taxes, and helped people now on the ground? What a hero he would be. So it's mind-boggling as to why he's not doing it.
Yeah, a lot about Boris's mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's true.
Tonya, thanks ever so much. Now, when it comes to the birds and the bees, most parents want to be the ones to navigate their kids through the difficult conversations. Well, at a load of schools, private companies are being drafted in to teach sex ed, and the parents are being told they're banned from finding out what. If that wasn't bad enough, it seems a lot of the unofficial curriculum buys heavily into the trendy narrative that kids should question their gender, while also glorifying X-rated activities that no child should be exposed to. Well, thankfully, the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, is putting a stop to what is clearly a really troubling issue of safeguarding. You send your kids to school to learn maths and English, not become psychologically deranged little sex zealots. Meanwhile, what these creepy adults are up to, trying to brainwash children into following their fetishes, is quite another thing. I'd go one further and do a thorough audit of who these people are and their companies, as well as what they want to indoctrinate kids with. Well, let's talk now to Tanya Carter from Safe Schools Alliance, which works to promote better safeguarding in schools. Tanya, you'd think you wouldn't need an organisation to push for safeguarding in schools. When you send your kid to schools, you expect them to be in probably one of the most protected environments they could be. What is going on with sex education?
Well, absolutely. We've no idea what is going on, Alex. It appears it's just a Wild West out there. There seems to be no accountability anywhere. No one's taking responsibility for it. There's no transparency. Like you said, we hear every day from parents who are trying to see what their children are being taught in schools, and the schools are refusing to tell them. That's a massive red flag.
What sort of things do you think they're being taught, even though the parents aren't allowed to see what's on the agenda? Do you have any idea what is?
Well, when we finally get hold of some of these materials, some of the things which are being taught in some schools are things like we've come across materials where children as young as 13 were told that participating in extreme porn could be liberating to them. We're coming across an awful lot of stuff in secondary school and in primary school that promotes really sexist, regressive stereotypes by telling little boys that if they play with dolls or they like pink, maybe they're not a little boy, maybe that's got nothing to do with your body parts, maybe being a girl is all about your interests. So there is an awful lot of stuff like that going on in some schools, and I can understand why they wouldn't want parents to know they're teaching that, because parents are not happy about that.
Now, people sitting watching this must be absolutely horrified hearing what you were saying. But it begs the question of why these companies exist that want to teach children stuff like this.
Well, yes, you've got to question the motivations here. I mean, all the parents we hear from, most people want their children to have sex ed, but what parents are expecting from sex ed is that their children are taught about puberty, so that changes to their body are not a surprise to them. They want children to know about reproduction. They want children to know about the law, how it's illegal to have sex before you're 16, and that law's there for the protection of children. They want their children to learn about things like protecting themselves from diseases, different types of contraception, obviously age appropriately. So they're absolutely horrified to discover that it's not basic information that's being given in some schools, it is indoctrination. I mean, we want to be clear, some schools are absolutely getting this right, but the proportion of schools that aren't is really quite alarming and seems to be increasing by the day.
Yeah, alarming indeed. Tanya Carter from the Safe Schools Alliance, thanks so much for lifting a lid on this topic. Oh, Tanya, I heard that sharp intake of breath when she said, the bit that you responded to is when she said some kids are being taught that extreme porn can be liberating. What is going on?
What the hell is going on? I mean, I remember having chats with my sons, who are now 14 and 16, when they were quite young, and saying to them, be very careful what you seek when you're looking online, because something that you see, you won't be able to unsee, and it might disturb you for life. And they are bringing that into schools to disturb these children for life. I mean, their hormones are going on, their brain patterns are fusing now, and they're putting porn into their minds. It's wrong, and I'm gonna call out on this one. This going and teaching sexualisation into primary schools is a form of paedophilia, and I want it to be called out. What it is, it's a form of paedophilia. I want to know who are the companies that are doing this, who is paying for it, because it's making a lot of money, because they're all independent groups that are going in, schools are paying for it. Which head teacher of a primary school wants them to come in and teach kids how to play with themselves from 5 or 6 or 7 years old, or sexualising them from 5 or 6 or 7 years old? I want that head teacher, person drawn across the coals, because all it is sexualising children and introducing paedophilia, full stop, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, Tonya, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. I'm really glad you had the audacity to say it as well. Thank you for that. Well, what is this latest lefty craze of gluing yourself to a painting? Now, some woke activist morons with nothing better to do and clearly no sensible employ have glued themselves to the painting of the Last Supper, having already gone sticky-fingered on a Van Gogh and a constable to moan about oil or something. Thing is, the more these imbecilic blockheads make headlines for their puerile acts, the more they will continue to do it, until Japan declares war on France because tourists can't see the Mona Lisa. How about we just ignore their stupid little stunts and starve them of the publicity they crave? Then the Last Supper will be their last scupper. Enjoyed that rant? Stay for more. Now, Labour's Angela Rayner has proudly boasted she has told Hansard, the Parliamentary Archive Service, to not correct her grammar. Why? Not being able to speak English well isn't some kind of badge of honour. Her argument is that people want to see MPs who really represent them. But to suggest working-class people should be condemned to illiteracy is hardly being an aspirational role model. If you don't know something or you get something wrong, learn to do it right and do it better. Too much culture today glorifies boneheadedness. We don't need incorrect English being vaunted as some kind of emblem of moral rectitude. It's not, especially from a woman who throws about words like scum. Well, perhaps if she made fewer mistakes, she would be less ridiculed by her peers. Now, 2.5 million people say they are too sick to work, according to the latest census, up 18% since before the pandemic. Well, what's going on here? We either have a nation of long COVID sufferers or people too beguiled by life in pyjamas living off handouts to be bothered to go out and make a living again. With a generation brought up bleating about mental health, it's now the reason given by half of under 55s for not being able to work, thinking it's a human right to just fester. Well, it turns out that the over 55s, the people actually most likely to get health issues, are the ones least likely to quit or reduce their work. It's simple. We've indoctrinated a generation with a poor me attitude, and we're now paying the price of that pampering in backlog Britain. So, a new TikTok trend is seeing teenage boys don suits and go to the cinema en masse, calling themselves gentle minions. Cinemas are now going to ban the sharply clad youngsters after some got rowdy and disrupted screenings. By all means, bar big groups and chuck out ne'er-do-wells ruining the film for everyone else. But the suits thing, it's actually quite nice seeing adolescents dressed like gentlemen rather than gender-fluid ex-convicts who got dressed in the dark. Tonya, anything there that you want to chew on?
That made me laugh so much. It's so true. I mean, I think it's quite nice. Like you said, these group of boys that are dressing up and doing something together. I think it's cute, as long as they're not disrupting the cinema. I'd love my sons to put suits on and go to the cinema.
But it's an interesting thing, the influence that social media now has on young people and culture. This enables sort of mass protest and also, you know, trends like this.
It does. It does. But if it's used for something that's nice, I don't mind it. We're never going to get rid of social media. We're never going to get rid of TikTok. So we have to find a way of making it work for us.
Oh, you say never, but I'm not Prime Minister yet.
Yeah, OK. Oh, can I be your deputy when you are? Because I'd really like to be the person helping you along that road.
Now, on the Angela Rayner thing and the grammar, it's interesting. We're having a conversation about this in the office before coming on air. And, people are sort of divided. Some people are saying, well, if that's the way she speaks, that's fine. And other people say, it's just condescending to say that if I get my grammar wrong, lump it.
Well, so I'm an immigrant child. So both my parents have got strong Greek accents. But my mother could tell when I was speaking badly or when I was speaking well or if I was speaking with incorrect grammar, and I would get a slap around the chops if I spoke incorrectly or if I used slang in any way, manner or form. She says, you've got to try and be the best of yourself. So it's a completely ridiculous thing, and it goes with her kind of faux, look at me, I'm a tough thing and you take me as I am or don't take me at all, that kind of attitude. We all should aspire to better, shouldn't we? We should all aspire to better. It's the example that we want to set our children, not take me as I am or don't take me at all. And after her little scum comment, somebody shouted out, Tory scum from me from the bus. That was absolutely down to her. I got abused because of her. So she needs to step up and behave herself a little bit and speak nicely.
Someone who does speak nicely is you, and I've loved having you on the programme and your forthright views. Do come back and join me again in the future. Tonya Buxton, ladies and gentlemen. Well, lots of you have been getting in touch via email and on social media about the latest scandal engulfing the Prime Minister. Elliot gave his view. Ooh, Boris is in trouble because of his astounding error of judgment in appointing a person to the position of Deputy Chief Whip who had that kind of reputation. Anne-Marie responded to our guest Frank Furedi's view that the Chris Pincher scandal has been blown out of proportion. She says, do that in business and you'd be sacked. Furedi is talking complete and utter rubbish. Alan, on the cost of living crisis and the price of goods in the supermarket, says, I wonder how many of those shoppers supported lockdown, banged their pots and pans on a Thursday, liked the furlough payments the government handed out, were in favour of free tests and free vaccines and free masks, and thought that there'd be no future consequences. Alan, you make a very good point, my man. That's about it for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow, just before the briefing with Darren McCaffrey. It's time for a short break and a check on the weather forecast. Bye from me.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine day for many of us with some sunshine out there, but also a lot of cloud. And later, cloud will thicken in the northwest as areas of rain move in from the northwest. Weather fronts toppling in around a large area of high pressure that is sitting to the west of the UK. Now that is extending a ridge into much of the country, so hence the fine weather for the rest of the day. But the weather fronts that are toppling in from the northwest, well, they're going to bring some persistent wet weather to northern and western Scotland and some dribs and drabs of rain to southern and eastern Scotland, then northern England after midnight, as well as North Wales and perhaps Northern Ireland. A lot of cloud extending south as well. And with the cloud and with a freshening breeze, it's going to be a mild night. Certainly temperatures a bit higher compared to the last couple of nights. But a bright start for southern and southeastern counties where the cloud doesn't quite reach from the northwest. A cloudy start elsewhere, and we've got that continued wet weather for western Scotland, particularly over the hills of the west. The rain tends to ease through the day, and eastern Scotland sees some brighter interludes at 20 Celsius in Aberdeen, but a gusty wind for northern areas will make it feel cool in many spots. And in the south, well, a warmer day to come, 24 to 27 Celsius in places. So plenty of sunshine and clear skies as we end the day on Wednesday, but a lot of cloud elsewhere and further light outbreaks of rain across northern areas. But even in the north, that rain is tending to fragment and disappear by dawn on Thursday. A mild night to come, so a mild start on Thursday, but a generally cloudy start, a lot of grey skies out there. And it may take some time across central and southern parts of the UK for that cloud to lift and break up. But it is looking